Welcome to My Irish Radio Music and Culture News, your connection to everything happening in the world of Irish music and culture. I'm Jamie Flanagan. Each episode will share the latest news from Ireland's vibrant music scene, from traditional and folk to rebel ballads, pub tunes, Celtic rock, and today's top Irish pop. We'll also bring you updates on festivals, cultural events, and people keeping Irish heritage alive around the world. And remember, My Irish Radio is more than just a station. It's your community, your soundtrack, your voice. You can listen 24/7 at myirishradio.com and through the links in the podcast description below. Here's the best part. You can be part of it. Host your very own show on My Irish Radio. Choose your playlist, share your stories, make My Irish Radio your Irish Radio. Let's get into what's happening this week in Irish music and culture.
You know, when you think about seismic events, like an actual earthquake, there is this really fascinating paradox in how we experience them.
Right, because you feel the shockwaves first.
Exactly. You have these sprawling, continent-spanning ripples, and they travel across the entire globe. They shake buildings. They register on seismographs thousands of miles away.
Yeah, the visible impact.
Right. But if you trace all of that immense global energy backward, past the destruction and the noise, you don't actually find something massive. You find a microscopic point of friction, just, deep underground, the epicenter.
That's a great way to look at it.
And right now, looking at the stack of sources for this deep dive, Irish culture is causing a global earthquake. I mean, Jessie Buckley is winning Oscars, U2 is dropping surprise records.
Huge international headlines.
Yeah, but the real story isn't the shockwaves making the news in Los Angeles or New York. It's the friction happening back home. In local pubs, indie studios, community festivals, that's what is actually causing all of this.
Yeah. It is a really compelling way to frame the dynamic, because we are looking at a particularly explosive week in early April 2026.
Yeah.
And the sources reflect an ecosystem that is pulling off a very, very difficult balancing act. You have a single nation dominating the global stage, but to sustain that outward-facing presence, it is intensely nurturing its grassroots art scenes.
Which is so hard to do simultaneously.
It really is. But the fundamental rule of this kind of, cultural physics is that without the localized foundation, the global footprint eventually collapses.
You just run out of fuel.
Exactly. You simply run out of authentic material to export.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you just glance at the headlines this week, you would assume the entire focus of the Irish art scene is international domination.
Oh, for sure.
Let's start at the absolute peak of global visibility for film, right? The 98th Academy Awards. Actress Jessie Buckley just made history.
She did. It's incredible.
She is officially the very first Irish woman to win Best Actress, which is, a ceiling that has existed for nearly a century, and it's finally shattered.
And the magnitude of that really cannot be overstated. A win like that doesn't just elevate the individual, it validates the entire training ground and the theatrical culture that she emerged from.
Yeah, the whole ecosystem.
Right. And she is doing this in the exact same week that global music giants. I mean, artists who have been established for decades are making major moves.
Like U2.
Exactly. U2, arguably the most prominent Irish cultural export of the last 40 years, they just dropped a surprise EP.
Titled Easter Lily, right?
Yes, Easter Lily. And it's acting as a precursor to a brand new album.
Which is classic U2, to be honest. Using the element of surprise to just completely hijack the algorithm.
Very on brand for them.
But when you look at how these artists operate, a really clear pattern emerges. Let's look at Dermot Kennedy for a second. The sources note he is prepping for these incredibly dense, sold-out gigs at the Aviva Stadium in Dublin.
Which is massive.
We are talking tens of thousands of people. Massive logistics. But while he is scaling up to this stadium-level spectacle, he's actively discussing how his new album is specifically honoring his local hometown of Rathcool.
Down to the specific streets.
Yeah. I look at this dynamic like a rubber band. The further an Irish artist stretches onto the global stage, like playing massive stadiums or holding an Oscar, the harder they seem to snap back to their geographical roots.
That's a really sharp observation.
Kennedy isn't writing generalized pop anthems about universal heartbreak to appeal to, like the widest possible demographic. He's writing about a specific suburb in Dublin.
What's fascinating here is the underlying mechanics of authenticity. You might assume that to fill the Aviva Stadium or to resonate with some Academy voter in California, you have to water down your art.
Right, like you don't make it generic.
Exactly. You need to sand off the rough edges and make it universally palatable. But the data from these sources suggests the exact opposite.
It really does.
Global audiences are actually craving hyper-specificity. When Dermot Kennedy details life in Rathcool, a listener in Tokyo or Chicago doesn't feel alienated by the unfamiliar geography.
They don't just tune out because they don't know the street names.
No, they actually connect with the grounded reality of the emotion.
Yeah.
Because it feels earned.
It's the specificity that makes it universal. If you try to write a song for everybody, you end up writing a song for nobody. It just becomes elevator music.
Precisely. And that philosophy of leaning into the specific is really driving international touring right now.
Oh.
And it is a two-way street.
How so?
Well, we have acts like Bell X1 and Dowry Strings taking their distinct, heavily localized sound across borders. They are playing in New York this week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they aren't altering their sound for American audience. They are exporting the Irish experience verbatim. But you also see the reverse gravity happening.
Meaning acts coming in.
Right. International artists are increasingly using Ireland as a foundational touring stop because the audience there is primed for live performance.
The sheer volume of acts coming in is staggering. Just looking at the list, you have Zayn hitting the 3 Arena in May.
Yep.
Neil Horan is bringing his tour home in November. Rick Astley is playing Dublin and Belfast this April. And Tom Jones is slated for later in the year.
It's a huge lineup.
That spans multiple generations of pop and legacy acts, all funneling into one country.
Which speaks directly to the physical infrastructure. To host an artist of Zayn's caliber, or to prep for a massive Tom Jones production, you need world-class venues.
You can't just put them in a pub.
No, you need experienced local crews, seamless logistics. The local scene isn't just about someone writing songs in a quiet corner. It's about maintaining a globally recognized touring standard that can handle a massive influx of international stadium acts.
But how do we actually get to that point? It is very easy for us to sit here, look at Jessie Buckley holding a golden statue, and assume the talent just magically appears fully formed.
Right, the overnight success myth.
Exactly. But what happens during the 10 years before they get to the Oscars or the Aviva Stadium? How does a government practically support an artist through that terrifying runway where they're just scraping by?
That is the critical question.
Well, the sources gave us a major piece of industry news this week. The basic income for the art scheme officially opens for applications on April 15th.
Let's clearly define what this scheme actually entails, because it alters the foundational economics of the creative industry entirely.
Okay, break it down for us.
This is not a loan that needs to be paid back.
Yeah.
And it is not a one-off, highly competitive grant tied to delivering a specific album or painting.
Which is usually how arts funding works, right?
Exactly. You usually have to promise a specific deliverable. But this is tangible, state-backed, regular financial support offered directly to artists to simply live.
Just to exist.
Yes. It is designed to dismantle the starving artist model, which is a historical precedent where only people with generational wealth or those willing to endure extreme financial precariousness could afford to participate in culture.
So what does this all mean? Because when I first read the details of this scheme, my mind immediately went to the tech sector.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Does this function similarly to, like, seed capital for tech startups? Think about it. When a venture capitalist gives a tech founder 2 years of runway, the entire point is so the founder doesn't have to worry about keeping the lights on.
They buy them time to build.
Exactly. They can take wild risks. They can build something revolutionary because they aren't stressed about next month's rent. Is this basic income essentially giving musicians the runway to experiment?
That's a fascinating comparison.
Like, maybe they can dive into complex production genres like hip-hop or electronic music instead of strictly sticking to commercially safe acoustic pop just to guarantee a gig at the local bar.
It is similar in terms of buying time, but here is where your startup analogy breaks down slightly.
Okay, tell me.
Startups are given that seed capital because the venture capitalist expects a massive eventual financial return on investment. They want a unicorn.
Right. They want their money back tenfold.
The basic income for the arts demands zero direct financial return from the artist. It is entirely focused on cultural return. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it acts less like venture capital and more like a cultural safety net.
A safety net. Okay.
Yeah. Think about an acrobat. Without a net, an acrobat only performs the routine they absolutely know they can land. They cannot afford the physical risk of falling.
Because the stakes are too high.
Exactly. But the moment you string up a safety net below them, they try the triple flip. We are suddenly seeing musical triple flips in Ireland because the baseline financial terror of existing has been removed.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Does a safety net actually create better art, or does it just create more comfortable artists?
That is the classic counterargument.
Because you could argue, and a lot of people do, that friction and hardship are exactly what forged great music. You know, the blues wasn't born out of comfort.
It is a valid pushback. But the sources this week actually provide the answer. The proof of those musical triple flips is everywhere in the new releases.
So it's working.
It seems to be. The basic income doesn't remove the emotional or creative friction from an artist's life. It removes the administrative friction. It gives them the studio hours required to actually execute complex ideas.
Oh, I see. Which is incredibly evident in the hip-hop and R&B scene right now.
Absolutely.
Just look at the releases we are tracking this week. Kojaki is making his return with a new track called Antihistamine, and the sources make a specific point to note that this is his first release in 2 whole years.
And that 2-year gap is the critical detail. Time is the most expensive commodity for a musician.
Right.
The basic income model gives an artist like Kojaki the hours required to sit in a studio and meticulously refine a complex, layered production.
Instead of just rushing something out.
Exactly. Under the old model, he might have been forced to tour relentlessly or take on commercial side projects just to survive, leaving literally no bandwidth for deep creative work.
It fundamentally changes the output. And you also have Spackle up in Belfast dropping a single called Stop Playing.
That's a great track.
The sources specifically highlight that it is heavily inspired by Kanye. And then Maverick Sabre just released this rich, soulful track called 8 Stages.
Yeah.
That is a sprawling, complex hip-hop and R&B ecosystem. We are miles away from the stereotype of just, a singer-songwriter with an acoustic guitar in the corner of a pub.
Which isn't to say that traditional indie and rock scenes are suffering at the expense of these new genres, by the way.
Oh, definitely not.
They're thriving right alongside them. You have veteran Dublin indie acts like SAC, releasing a remastered version of their Tag, which really proves the longevity of that specific scene.
Yeah, the veterans are still pushing forward.
Simultaneously, brand new acts like Florence Road are debuting their Spring Forward EP. The incubator is successfully supporting the entire spectrum of sound.
And there's a whole wave of emerging acts bubbling that the sources flag as ones to watch. First Class Rebel, Jay Shields, and AMAC.
The talent pool is incredibly deep right now.
And plus, the live event infrastructure is physically warping to fit all these diverse sounds. There is a brand new Heineken Multi-City Music Festival announced this week. And look at this lineup.
It's quite the mix.
You have the Irish rock band Inhaler co-headlining with the electronic music legends Basement Jaxx, putting driving indie rock and legendary dance anthems on the exact same bill. It shows an audience that is deeply hungry for genre cross-pollination.
And that cross-pollination only happens when the underlying infrastructure is robust enough to support it.
Right.
You're listening to My Irish Music and Culture News, brought to you by My Irish Radio, streaming the best in Irish and Celtic music all day, every day. From classic jigs and reels to the latest Irish rock and pub favorites, we celebrate the sound of Ireland worldwide. Want to be more than a listener? Be a host. Share your love for the Irish music by hosting your own show on My Irish Radio. It's easy to get started. Just send us an email, myirishradio@gmail.com. Don't forget, you can listen 24/7 at myirishradio.com. Make My Irish Radio your Irish Radio.
But we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking a healthy cultural ecosystem only incubates the youth or the avant-garde. A truly functional system sustains the entire lifespan of creativity, and it constantly dialogues with its own history.
That is a crucial pivot, because looking at these sources, it is very clear this isn't just about the new kids on the block.
Not at all.
The intergenerational conversation happening in Irish culture right now is just fascinating. The Bealtaine Festival just announced this ambitious nationwide program, and its entire mandate is celebrating arts and creativity in aging.
Which is so rare to see prioritized.
It is a dedicated space acknowledging that creative output doesn't just suddenly evaporate when an artist hits a certain demographic.
It actively leans into intergenerational dialogue. It really pushes back against the music industry's traditional, almost obsessive focus on youth.
Yeah, the industry is usually entirely youth-obsessed.
And we see that same dialogue bleeding directly into how traditional music is being treated. Tradition in Ireland isn't static. It isn't locked behind glass in a museum.
It's living.
It is constantly being remixed and reinterpreted. Take the legendary group Dervish, for example.
Oh, yeah.
They announced a new album, The Great Irish Songbook, Volume 2, Poets and Storytellers. But they aren't just playing old standards in a vacuum.
They brought in new voices.
Exactly. The lead single, Blue is the Eye, specifically features the contemporary American artist Sarah Jaros. They are actively bridging geographical and generational boundaries to keep the music breathing.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when you synthesize all these sources, you realize Irish culture actively refuses to just archive its history in dusty museums.
It's a very active relationship with the past.
It brings it to life and puts it to work. We see this massive outpouring of living heritage in the folk and trad scenes just this week alone. Declan O'Rourke is announcing a new album.
Yep.
Lemoncello shared a single called Articulate Animal ahead of their upcoming record Perfect Place. Rory and the Island are dropping their new album 9, and Caroline Keane is prepping her album Rise for May.
It's a busy calendar.
It is a relentless pipeline of traditional sounds being modernized.
It is living heritage, absolutely. And it is deeply illuminating to contrast that musical output with how physical history is being navigated this week in the sources.
What do you mean?
Well, you have the solemn historical gravity of the Easter Rising commemorations taking place in both Dublin and Belfast. These are very traditional remembrances of a complex, defining moment in the nation's past.
Very serious, very reflective.
Exactly. But in that exact same cultural breath, the theater scene is turning recent history into modern spectacle. The Irish World covered a new musical called Moonlight, which literally turns the life of rock legend Phil Lynott into musical theater.
The contrast there is wild.
It really is.
On one hand, you have the quiet reflection of the Easter Rising, and on the other, you are taking a guy who practically defined modern Irish rock swagger and translating his life into stage choreography.
It's two very different ways of processing history.
And that kind of reinterpretation is happening across every single medium. In literature, Colm Toibin's The News from Dublin is marked as the Book of the Week.
A fantastic author.
In the visual arts, Isabel Nolan's piece Dream Shook is being unveiled for the Venice Biennale, which, for context, is essentially the Olympics of the art world.
A huge deal.
Even down in Cobb, they are preparing to host the British Titanic Society's 2026 annual convention. They are taking physical geography tied to a historic maritime tragedy and transforming it into an interactive international convention space.
This raises an important question regarding how art functions as an unbroken thread. The exact same cultural ecosystem that is funding a hip-hop artist in Belfast today is also funding the deep exploration of the past.
It's all connected.
It's why you see intimate, cutting-edge modern dance pieces like Trojans by Luel getting incredibly positive attention, while simultaneously a production like The Ballad of Johnny and June, which navigates the legacy of country music icons, is working through mixed reviews on stage.
Yeah.
It is a culture that is constantly iterating on itself, unafraid to examine its heroes and its tragedies through completely new lenses.
And iterating at every possible scale, too. We talked about Dermot Kennedy prepping for the massive Aviva Stadium, but down at the neighborhood level, the hustle is just as intense.
Oh, the local scene is buzzing.
You have jazz pianist Greg Lloyd launching an album right inside Camden Recording Studios in Dublin, creating this highly intimate experience. You have the When Next We Meet Festival announcing their full lineup to cater specifically to local crowds. There is no aspect of the culture that is sitting still.
No, it is entirely kinetic. Every generation, every medium, from jazz to musical theater to the Venice Biennale, is in constant motion.
Moving forward while looking back.
They are drawing heavily from their historical roots, but they are structurally and financially supported to build the future.
It is genuinely a lot to take in, but when you lay it all out, you start to see the machinery behind the magic.
You really do.
We started at the peak of the mountain with Jessie Buckley's historic Oscar win and U2's algorithm-breaking Easter Lily EP.
The global shockwaves.
Right. But then we looked under the hood at the basic income for the arts acting as a cultural safety net, allowing artists like Kojake and Kabakal the studio time to take wild risks.
The epicenter.
And we trace that all the way down to how history itself is being modernized, from the Beltane Festival honoring older artists to Phil Lynott getting the musical theater treatment.
It is a profound model for cultural sustainability. But it leaves us with a lingering thought to ponder, long after this deep dive ends.
I love good lingering thought. Lay it on us.
Well, we have established that when a nation provides something like a state-sponsored basic income, It ensures its authentic, localized art survives and innovates.
Yes, the safety net works.
But if that resulting art, born from that hyper-local authenticity, becomes highly engineered for massive global exports, Hollywood awards, and stadium tours, at what point does the authentic local experience run the risk of becoming a carefully curated product designed purely for international consumption?
Oh, wow.
Does the sheer weight of global demand eventually alter the local authenticity it so desperately craves?
That is a brilliant tension to chew on, the friction between the authentic and the exported. And to you listening, keep exploring, keep listening, and keep looking closely at the vibrant world around you, because just like that earthquake we talked about at the very beginning, the shockwaves are only going to get bigger, but the real magic is always going to be found right there at the local epicenter.
That's it for this episode of My Irish Radio, Music and Culture News. Thanks for joining us. And remember, you can hear the best in Irish and Celtic music 24 hours a day at myirishradio.com. If you ever dreamed of sharing your favorite tunes and stories, now's your chance. Become one of the hosts. Host your own show right here on My Irish Radio. Just send us an email. It's easy as that. myirishradio@gmail.com. Until next time, it's Jamie Flanagan. Keep the music playing and keep Ireland in your heart.